Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Get in My Ass, Man. Dumbledore leaned down to Harry's smooth body and caressed his small penis. He moved his back in rhythm with his old hairy mouth. Dumbledore, wizened and old but experienced, took out his wand, dark as rosewood and hard as birch. "Orgasmicus!" he exclaimed confidently. At this, Harry collapsed on the ground, as if Voldemort had just cast the Cruciatus curse on him, but his vocalizations this time were of a different nature. Dumbledore confidently slipped open his robes, and peeled off his lingerie, tossing them at Harry in his sly old charm. Harry's jaw dropped when he saw the enormity of Dumbledore's giant, throbbing erection, and whipped out his own wand, a new one, of sturdy birch, dragon heartstring, and a substantial 10.5 inches long. He thought back to what happened between him and Mr. Ollivander that day with mixed feelings. Although he was thoroughly satisfied with the results, and he was thankful that Ollivander had held back, he was a bit disappointed that he wasn't able to go farther, because he had to attend to another customer. He had used every single spell at his disposal. When he reflected on his favorite spell, he determined that after the legendary Orgasmicus, his favorite was the ever-popular Engorgio. He had used it many times in class, especially potions behind the cauldron with Ron. "Harry, as your headmaster, we're technically not supposed to fuck," Dumbledore explained. But Harry stammered. "Please, I may be small in the sack, but I'm great as a lover," Harry seductively said. Dumbledore smiled gently. "I know, but if the Wizengamot were to find out, we would get in some serious trouble. I know you always find a way out of trouble, but as an old man, I can't get out." "Oh well," Harry said. He grabbed Dumbledore, and beat him over the head with a stick. Dumbledore awoke with a startle. He was chained down to the floor. He was butt naked, and Harry was as well. He unleashed his wand, both metaphorical and literally. He exclaimed, "Engorgio!" The small limp grew to several feet, and Harry thrusted with all his might into the old man. Dumbledore groaned with pleasure. "Don't stop," he exclaimed. Just then, Hermione walked in. "What the hell?" she blurted out suddenly. Despite her shock, her panties were instantly wet. She thought of the previous night spent with Filch, chained to this same wall for being caught stealing one of Snape's sexual enhancement potions. Seeing the iron cuffs again made her shiver. Stepping forward, taking the initiative, as both of the men before her stood frozen like deer in headlights, she untied the sash of her own robe and pointed her wand toward her moistened pussy. Using a nonverbal spell taught to her by Professor McGonagall during one of their girl-to-girl chats, her tight crease slowly became shallower, temporarily appearing as a smooth surface before stretching outward into a larger and larger sexual tool. Dumbledore's body stretched out to her, straining against the chain, as he longed for her body. His wish was granted, as his wrinkled skin met passionately with her smooth tones. Harry stared at her crotch, the enormous protrusion bulging from the upper V of her crotch, the vivid auburn of the down surrounding it, and the glistening drops hanging from the tips of the hair. Dumbledore must have been staring at her wonderful curls as well, for he started moaning like a broken toy makes a child cry. Hermione walked over to him, her hair flowing like a lion's mane, stretched her legs wide apart, and clambered onto Dumbledore's glamorous cock. Harry stepped up behind her, and within moments, was grunting harder than if he'd run a marathon. Dumbledore's penis was limp nearly instantly. The vigor of a strappingly young lass such as Hermione was simply too much for the kind old man to handle. Hermione's moans were coming non-stop soon, and were matched in intensity only by Harry's rapid panting and Dumbledore's sighs of fascination. Just then, he noticed over Harry's shoulder a moving portrait and upon closer inspection, found that it was none other than Sir Cadogan, who was certainly doing something most vile. "Wait, what?" Dumbledore bellowed. He felt so violated, even more so, when he noticed the other deceased headmasters observing him and partaking in similar behaviors. Then, the door flew open and the mighty frame of Hagrid burst in, accompanied with a bellow of shock and pleasure. "Petrificus totalis!" The trio all yelled simultaneously. Just as soon as he had interrupted, Hagrid fell to the floor. Soon he was overcome with magical pleasure and things he could only imagine in his wildest dreams. The three other wizards rushed toward the half-giant and started to accomplish one thing they all had in common, to rape a giant. They completed the task easily and he too was bound to the floor, leaving him vulnerable to any aspiring wizard rapists. Unfortunately for him, there were three in the room. When he came to, he was surrounded by many of his old friends, all having a go with the huge man and his satisfying penis. Stupefied, a wizard yelled, as Hagrid was once again bound to the floor. Once again, he woke up, this time permanently. He noticed the white fluid stuck to his beard, and red fluid protruding from the giant's ass crack. Time had passed, and everyone tried to forget that steamy night in the headmaster's office. Harry had decided to experiment. He took his firebolt, and shoved it up his own anal area. It was amazing to feel the soft wood against his internal sex organs. It tickled him in the ways Dumbledore couldn't manage even, as an old and experienced wizard. The pleasure was unbearable and it was so good that Harry fell off the mighty broom. He plunged to the earth, and was hit with a horrible feeling, and Madame Pomfrey was there to see his limp penis protruding from his Quidditch robes. Cho Chang watched Harry from between the curtains surrounding Harry's hospital bed. His limp penis struck a chord in her, and it was all he could do not to envision herself suckling his hot salty cum from the wet noodle, a flavor that she had only tasted before as a Berty Bott's every flavor bean. She touched her wand to her clit and whispered, "Tarantella clitoria." The result was more violent than she could have imagined. Suddenly she was squealing with pleasure so loudly that Madame Pomfrey was walking over to her bed to see if she was all right. Barely able to stammer out the counter curse before she came to her bed. She flushed a deep shade of red at almost being caught red-wanded masturbating. Madame Pomfrey saw Cho's deep blush, but her gaze lingered only a few seconds before descending down to her full breasts. Now they both blushed, feeling the sexual tension build, as they both knew what was about to happen. A patient a few beds down called for help, but all else was irrelevant. Madame Pomfrey was completely entranced by the young girl before her, and she barely had the foresight to pull the curtain around the two of them before mounting her youthful prize. With legs spread wide, Cho started violently fingering her dripping folds, moaning more violently than she ever thought possible with exquisite pleasure and delight. Madame Pomfrey screamed, "Ingorgio Maximus," as she pointed her wand at her own clit, and Cho watched it wide-eyed, as it swelled up even larger than Dumbledore's gargantuan cock had been. Then, before she knew what was happening, she felt Madame Pomfrey's clit deep inside herself, hitting her cervix with a violent force, stronger than either Weasley had hit a bludger or Fetchford. Within seconds they were both moaning at the top of their lungs. Harry, wondering what was going on but loving every second of it, staggered over, ripped down the curtains and conjured up the memories of the many long hours shared between him and Gilderoy Lockhart, remembering the many tips he had been given, not the least of which was to always cast the Protego charm on his wiener, both to protect from STDs and chafing. He always tried to follow this advice, but seldom remembered to, always starting to fuck, before he knew what was going on. Before mounting Miss Pomfrey's massive plump ass and grabbing Cho's bright round tits, Harry started laughing and said, "Ha ha ha, I've always wanted to do this to an Asian bitch," before squeezing them as hard as he could, with the strength granted to him through hours of grabbing snitches, not to mention the penis of every other Gryffindor, including several attempts to grope nearly headless Nick. Just then, a familiar voice said, "Behold everyone, it's magical me." Gilderoy Lockhart stood in the doorway. His grin, though often overused, was quite appropriate. He strutted towards the threesome and out popped his own wand. "Ingorgio penis," he said, and suddenly his now big cock was unable to be recognized from his own robes, due to the similar coloring. Harry looked up from his bitch, who he was riding with a passion like no other. Gilderoy's cock reached the ignored patient several beds down from the threesome. But the patient, out of desperation, grabbed his big penis and started sucking on it. Gilderoy had not planned this, though he had a pleasure anyway. As the old man rode the young man, the hospital wing was erupting with chaos. People were sexing people, and if they couldn't find a suitable victim, they would just start to perform autofellatio to their penises. They would do acts not even performed by Harry on Duran that one night many years ago, when they first met. Gilderoy, still startled by the man 69 in him, mounted on Harry. Harry was getting more and more excited. He was grabbing an Asian's tits, riding an old hag, and being mounted by one of the most famous wizards ever to have lived. What an enjoyable event. Harry was quite satisfied. In the sexual mayhem, Hogwarts' doors had been left almost entirely unguarded. Voldemort, taking advantage of the lack of guards surrounding the castle, led his small troop of Death Eaters through the front gate and breached without incidents. Several of the Death Eaters became somewhat nauseated, as they passed ever-largening puddles of cum, but Voldemort himself was determined to end the boy who lived, walking nonchalantly through the puddles even, as they soaked his shoes and splashed on his socks. This was the moment he had been waiting for all these years. Finally, after wages was that student running through the halls naked. As Voldemort turned to look, he slipped in one of the puddles and fell face down into a particularly goopy mess of Goyle's cum, which had dripped gratuitously from Mrs. Norris' tight asshole only moments before. From far away, Dumbledore might have just thought it was an exceptionally tall, noseless fellow who'd been enjoying the cum puddles a bit too much. But he realized that this was no student. He stank of evil. Or maybe it was just the cum that was evil. But more likely than not it was Voldemort. Dumbledore whipped out his wand and strolled up behind his former student and said, "How are you, Tom?" Voldemort replied, "Good, yourself?" Dumbledore smiled charmingly and said, "Oh, marvelous. Let me tell you, Harry has really been learning a lot from me," as he snatched Voldemort's wand, snapped it, and nonchalantly untied his robes, letting them fall to the ground. "Do you remember this, Tom?" Dumbledore asked, taking Voldemort's hand and wrapping it around his long, dangling cock. He replied, "All too well," and proceeded to wrap his lips and tongue around it. However, Dumbledore stopped him and said, "Not here, I don't want the students to see us doing this. Meet me outside the Whomping Willow as soon as possible, for old time's sake." "Without a doubt, old friend," Voldemort hastily gasped. "I've been waiting for this day even longer than I've waited to kill Harry Potter." "Oh, that can wait. Right now all that matters is you and me," Dumbledore said, and with that he was gone. Voldemort looked down at his shoes to tidy them up, to look good for Albus, and thought he saw a cat hair in the ever-growing cum puddles surrounding him. He thought to himself, "Oh well, I might have a use for someone that ruthless someday. It pays to have someone capable of doing things even I wouldn't do." "Are you ready, Tom?" Dumbledore asked. "Ready, if you are," Voldemort replied. Dumbledore once again disrobed. His giant penis glistened in Voldy's eye. Dumbledore could see how obvious it was that Tom was impressed. The old wizard unleashed the Destructionator onto Tom. He may have been old, but he remembered one passage from the Muggle Bible, "Do unto others, as you would have them do unto you." It was nonsense, whatever it was. And it just so happened that Tom used to rate the old wizard when he was younger. And so Dumbledore would repay him. He unleashed the big prosthetic penis, and slid it into Voldemort's nose. Voldemort groaned with pleasure, and although he had more important things to do like kill Harry, that could wait. Right now he was gonna get it on with an old dude, just like when he was younger at the orphanarium, and when he would see that happen in the park. The penis inside Voldy was not in the regular hole. It was in something much odder, his nose. Voldemort suppressed the urge to sneeze, worried that this would upset his lover. Already his nasal passages were filled with almost as much cum as snot, and he was having trouble taking it all. Opening his mouth to pant for breath, Dumbledore instantly pulled out and began throat-fucking him instead. Still unsatisfied, he put his hand on Voldemort's hairless scalp and pushed him onto his back. Shoving his wand deep into Voldemort's anus, Dumbledore suddenly cried Aguamenti. The Dark Lord's eyes shot wide open, as he was given the most magical enema of his life. Hermione, emerging from the castle after them, had been concerned for Dumbledore's safety, but upon seeing the scene, instantly craved some of the action. However, as she started toward them, the Whomping Willow snatched her up and forced her legs apart with its branches. A large, gnarled piece of wood pressed against her protesting labia for a few seconds before allowing the arboreal intruder inside, where the rough bark repeatedly rubbed against her ever-sensitive G-spot. Realizing that the willow wanted more, she stripped herself stark naked and grabbed another branch, gently pressing it against her still bleeding asshole, silently craving more. Although she wanted to moan, she couldn't bring herself, because the pleasure was so immeasurable. The willow knowingly wormed its way deep inside her, stroking her like none other, expanding her ever so slightly, and growing more and more smooth to ease what might have been a splintery penetration otherwise. Then, Hermione found two more branches approaching her, this time seeking her plump perky breasts, gently caressing the nipples, as one would expect from one's lover after many years of intimacy. Then, the willow started draping her towards its entrance, seemingly craving penetration of its own, deep inside itself. Hermione instantly knew what she had to do. Without thinking, she started groping the tree trunk, looking for its big hard nut. She found it, as quickly as the tree's finger had found her clit, that is to say, after enjoying herself a bit on the tree's tough, hardy skin. The tree shuddered with a massive orgasm and nearly flung Hermione into the forbidden forest. In fact, were it not for Voldemort sharing an incredibly powerful sneeze with the same time that the tree had its biggest orgasm in all its years of raping students, Hermione would have slammed right into a tree. As it was, she merely ended up a good 20 feet outside of the forbidden forest, having been saved by Voldemort's enormous sneeze and the sheer force of the wind it blew. Harry Potter sensed that something was happening. He, Cho, and Madame Pomfrey were enjoying a hot steamy threesome. The chase had erupted and now they were the only ones left in the hospital wing. They were disappointed that everyone had left, because they were eager for more action. Oh well. As Harry continued to thrust into the winch, Cho Chang felt a sudden urge to reach a climax. The cum, though not white, like a man's, would be the liquid erupted from her vagina into Madame Pomfrey's penis. It sprayed everywhere. Back on the grounds, Dementors were beginning to swarm around the whomping willow. Dumbledore, wanting to go after Hermione but not really caring about anything, except the amazing nose-fucking going on, decided to buy himself a bit of time, before he gave Voldemort a royal finish. "Expecto Pascrotum," he shouted. From under the Dementors' robes came a dull thunk, as their testicles fell like stones to the ground, anchoring them there.